I think I'm going to go first and talk to you a little bit about the case study of Bill 124. So the first thing you want to know is, what is the Interior Design Association doing in a room with a bunch of engineers? And that's our branding challenge as the Association of Interior Designers. The reason we were one of the major stakeholders in Bill 124, it's about the built environment, it's about the interior building code. And most of the members of our association actually work in the corporate, commercial, healthcare, retail, and hospitality sector. Most people, when they hear interior design, where do you go? To your home. So we do have residential interior designers, but mostly this was about the interior designers who worked in public spaces. And Bill 124 was a process that in fact started from the Red Tape Commission, which identified a number of issues of the government where there was challenges and issues that needed to be dealt with. And as a result of it coming out in the Commission's report, BRAG was formed. The government loves acronyms, just like the association world loves acronyms. Building Regulatory Reform Advisory Group was created in 2000. And its intent was to resolve issues related to building permit application. And more specifically, it was to respond to building permit applications fraught with errors and problems and challenges. That was the statement, that the building permits applications that were being submitted had tons of errors in them. And so there needed to be solutions to the problem. Sounds like a simple challenge. Sounds like we can come up with a simple solution. So it was formed in 2000. I've been with Redo and IDC since 2000. It was kind of the first file on my desk. Guess what? I'm still dealing with it today. It's still an issue today, and you'll get to the end of the slide deck and you'll see why. One of the things that the government did was bring the stakeholders together. But who were the stakeholders? Over 50 organizations and companies were involved in the consultation process, which took place over 3 or 4 years. We had more meetings and more subsectors of meetings. I mean, the interior designers were excited because they were going to get jobs to build bigger boardrooms to accommodate the people that came to the meetings. It was probably the biggest consultation process I've ever witnessed. And John's laughing because he can remember the room. Everybody was around the table, and then everybody was around the chairs beyond the table, and there wasn't enough seats in the room to accommodate the stakeholders. Challenge number 1, is that an effective consultation? So we went throughout the process. Bill 124 received royal assent in June 2002, and it became effective July 2005. It was driven by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and its sole intent was to improve public safety and increase efficiency in building code enforcement. And throughout the entire process, the government cited 3 areas that they were going to focus on. Streamlining the process of building permit application, ensuring that there was knowledgeable practitioners, that engineers, architects, interior designers, architectural technologists, developers, builders, we wanted to make sure that they were all knowledgeable with respect to the interior building code and applying for permit. And then we wanted to make sure that the people that were submitting for permit and then taking on the jobs that those permits apply to were accountable for the work that they were submitting and the work that was ultimately being done. So that was it. 3 goals, 4 years, 50 organizations in the room to come up with the results. So let's go through them one at a time. And this just, sorry, I missed a slide. This talks about who was in the room and at the table. And of course, for every one of those professions, there's 2 or 3 organizations and companies and practitioners that were in the room. So let's look at streamlining the process. So the solutions that came out at the end of the day, and there was really a couple of main ones, but the one was a common application form. So as we all know, building permit applications occur at the municipal level. So you go to your municipality and you submit your building permit application. The provincial government thought that it made sense that we would have one common application form, standard time frames to get the application approved, and then once the application was approved, mandatory inspections for all projects. And I remember the meeting, probably 3 or 4 meetings, where we actually went through the common application form line by line. Standard application form, a whole bunch of people in the room, line by line. What should the first box say? What should the second box say? And this is the extent that we went through to get to the end of the process. So what were some of the challenges? Well, the first one and the biggest one, and this one sort of resonates throughout the whole process, is that the provincial government doesn't have any jurisdiction over the municipalities. So it was okay to come up with a common application form, but there was not enough effort to get the municipalities to accept the common application form. And they all had their own bylaws which dealt with how an application had to be submitted. For the municipalities to adopt that application form, they would have to amend their bylaws. They would have to throw out the application forms that they already had. So were the municipalities at the table at the right time? And were they engaged in the process and acceptance of the common application form? The other thing about the time frame, so there was a whole process of how much time should it take to get a permit application approved? 10 days, 20 days, 21 days. That was a meeting. Howard's nodding, he remembers, he was in the room. So we went through that process, we came up with the answer. The municipalities were pretty good about adopting that. But again, they all have their own bylaws. I was talking to a couple of interior designers last night. We had a meeting at the office. And I said, so how is that going with timing? Are you getting your applications on time? And they said, well, the short answer is yes. The long answer is no, because they've put a zoning application in front of it. And there's no common time frames on that part. So it can sit in zoning for 5 weeks, even if we don't need zoning. And then we get our common time frames of 20 days. So some challenges in terms of implementation. So what I want to say here is the consultation was done right. The extension of the consultation is what needed the focus. So we've come to an agreement on the application form, the timing. What we haven't come to an agreement on is the implementation part and getting the municipalities on board to work with the provincial government to make it effective. Okay? The next one was accountability. And this was the reason that this was on the table, obviously resulting from lawsuits. And there were cases where there were lawsuits as a result of building permits and then subsequent projects where it was, who do you point to? Who's to blame? Is it the municipality? Is the person who submitted the application, the municipality who approved it? Is the contractor, the developer? Who's to blame? So the conversation at the table was we need to have mandatory insurance for all people who submit for building permits. There has to be mandatory insurance. So that meeting in particular I remember because that's the meeting they invited 10, 15, maybe 20 different insurance companies to the room. And they said, well, here's the insurance we think you should have. You, interior designers, architects, engineers. Company A offers this type of insurance, Company B offers that type of insurance, and they try to agree on what the insurance should be. And the simple answer is, it should be for the practitioner. It should be for the profession. There isn't a common insurance that covers building permit application. So that was a very challenging one to get through. There was all kinds of conversation about that insurance isn't even available in the marketplace, and we went through 3 or 4 meetings on that piece. So that was a tough one to get through. Good intent, and I think everybody in the room would agree that it's important for professionals to have insurance for the work that they do, and I think it drove that piece home to make practitioners more more, what's the word I'm looking for? Accountable. Thank you. It wasn't coming out. Look at that. It says accountability at the top of the slide. Make practitioners more accountable and ensure that they have their insurance. Okay, and then the companies had to register with the government to indicate that they had the insurance in order to submit for permit. All makes sense. We've been through some of the challenges already. What insurance? How much insurance? Does it apply to everyone? And then who maintains the registry? One of the things that came out of this, with the architects and the engineers being self-regulated professions, that they would maintain the registry for their members. The other professions who aren't regulated, interior designers, would register with the ministry. So there was some confusion around how you would know if a professional carried insurance. So it's how do you find common ground when you're dealing with different regulated professionals who all of a sudden work in the same space. We've talked a lot today about engineers and topics related to you. But in this case, it's multi-discipline. It's several different professionals working together. And how do you do that when there's multi-stakeholders in the room? Knowledgeable practitioners. This is the big one. So this was, how do you make sure that a practitioner is knowledgeable about the building code and can therefore submit for permit? And this just went on and on and on forever. And surprisingly, to many of us, at the end of the day, what came out of it was mandatory exams for all practitioners who wanted to submit for permit. And in some cases, it was a minimum of 2, 3, or 4 multiple choice exams that practitioners would have to take in order to submit for permit. So think about the impact of that. You in the room all of a sudden get an email tomorrow, if you haven't already been affected by Bill 120, where it says, to continue to do what you're going to do, what you do today as a practitioner, you have to go and take government-administered multiple choice exam to demonstrate your competency to continue to practice. So this was big. This was huge. And I think the challenge was, A, what came out of the consultations took everyone by surprise to the extent of the exam. The conversations in the room were about demonstrating competency. It was the detail and the complexity of the exams that took everyone by surprise. And the huge miss from the government's perspective, from the consultation process, was that they didn't think about the impact to the small business owner. So at the end of the day, we had 18 months to get everybody up to speed and qualified and examined in order to be able to submit for permit. On January 1st, 2005, you had to be qualified. So for the year before that, I actually did sidestep my career, and I became a life coach. Every second call in my office was from a business owner who just couldn't deal with the situation. How do I carry on business? Sole practitioners. How do I stop my practice? I'm 52 years old, I'm 62 years old. How do I stop and write an exam to carry on and do business? How do I continue to get my clients if I'm busy studying for a multiple choice exam? And it was an open book multiple choice exam, which some will say is really just a memory test. So there was a lot of challenges with that process, and it was thought through to the extent that they wanted to demonstrate competency. It wasn't thought through in the impact to the business owner and the cost and the time to get there. The other thing, what happened as a result, is it opened a door for a new profession. And those were people who were good at taking exams, who went and got qualified in all the different sections that they could, and they opened up their doors as BSEN holders. And so for the ones who couldn't take the exam, they would pay someone to stamp for them. So we all of a sudden have a new business opportunity for those who would do that. And it also, on the flip side, for those who are just coming out of school, a lot of the students who were graduating in the various sectors would go and take their BSEN, because anyone could take it. And they would use that to market themselves to companies. I'll come and work for you because I have my BSEN. So if somebody at the top tier in the firm didn't have it, especially in the smaller companies, they would hire a young professional out of school who was used to testing and could easily pass that test, and then would have the stamp for the company to submit. So lots of challenges with that examination process. So then there was the lawsuit. Some of you in the room will be familiar with the lawsuit. The architects and engineers, PEO in particular, held the position that as a regulated profession, the government should not be having any say in how you manage the professionals. And there was a challenge to Bill 124. The engineers were successful. I must say, at the time the lawsuit was filed, I'm like, really, you think you're going to get out of this? And you did, and congratulations to John. And so architects and engineers no longer had to do the exams. Now, unfortunately, it happened after most of them were already qualified, so it was a little bittersweet, I'm sure. But the challenge was everybody else still has to do them. Interior designers still have to do them. And if you think about the numbers of people in the room, architects and engineers are a lot bigger in numbers and professionals than anybody left writing the exams and maintaining their qualifications. The other piece of it is the exams. One of the other challenges with the exams is that they were one exam for the discipline. So the architects didn't write an architect's exam, the engineers didn't write an engineers and interior design. It was one exam covering everything. And one of the biggest complaints I had as a life coach was, why am I answering a question about the bus radius from a bus stop on a corner? I practice interior design. So it was an exam about things you're not entitled to practice. And so since the exemption in our world, in the interior design world, and then one of the reasons that this still lives for me is that we've been trying to say to the government, none of this makes sense anymore. The biggest section of players who this applied to no longer have to participate in this process. And the exams that were written for everybody in the process don't make sense anymore. So they need to be changed. And we had a commitment 2 years ago for the exams to change, and that unfortunately hasn't happened yet. The government is about to spend significant dollars to revamp the exams because there's a new building code coming out. It becomes effective in January this year. And one of the things that the Act said was that for every time a code comes out, guess what? You have to re-qualify in some way. So my life coaching is about to begin again. We've just finished the consultation. TRAQUATUS, the new acronym, was a group that the ministry put together 2 years ago to start to talk about what are we going to do when the new building code comes out. Because the legislation actually says everybody has to take a new exam. And of course, they're feeling a bit beat up right now. So they wanted to talk to us about what do we think we could do to resolve this. The recommendation of the people left writing in the room, which are the building officials, the interior designers, the technologists, is let the professions deal with it in continuing education. We'll take an update course to say, you know, we understand the changes to the code, let the professions administer the exam, and just prove everybody's competency. As in the Interior Design Association, we already mandate members do building code update courses every 6 years when the code comes out. So it was a no-brainer for us to make that recommendation. So TRAQUATUS had 3 meetings. There was 3 consultants in the room to interpret the data that they heard, and we haven't heard back yet. And that was 2 years ago. So they obviously haven't made a decision. The code comes out in January. I just hope that they're not going to say in October, oh, by the way, you're going to need to do some update courses. That's not going to be pretty. So I think what I want to say is at the end of the day, the exams really need to be revisited. And it goes to the one chart that Marcia had. It was the only chart that I saw that was cyclical. We need to revisit the process. This was in 2000 that we started this conversation, and we're now in 2013. And when do you revisit the process to see if the decisions that you made still make sense today? Okay? So in summary, what worked and what didn't. That's the purpose of today's talk. So what worked? I mean, you can say that they definitely consulted, that the stakeholders were invited to the table. I mean, I say that it worked. It was definitely thorough. Like I said, we were doing, you know, discussions on the boxes on the application form. But I think on the flip side of that, what extent of consultation is too much? How do you ever get stakeholders to agree when you're doing that much detail with so many people in the room? when the legislation was released on January 1st, 2005, interior design specifically had a challenge with respect to the exams that we took, that one of the classification wasn't going to give us the right to practice in corporate commercial spaces, and they actually made a revision to the exam. So as it was rolling out, they were very agreeable to change. They were really monitoring the process. The communications was really good, but after the communications got up and running, that sort of fell off, and that was just them dealing with volume. So I think the important note there is communications is key when you're dealing with an implementation. Okay, so the consultation process is important. You get to the end result. When you get into delivery, communications is key. What didn't work? Too many involved. I've talked about that a lot. Hard to reach consensus. The whole provincial versus municipal. And I think the question for me at the end of the day is, and again, listening back to the conversations we've had today, was this a government issue to resolve, or was this a professions issue to resolve? This was about professionals applying for building permit. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs owns the building code, but the applications for permit are municipal issues. The professionals are the one who apply for permit. So it's a question of whose issue was it to resolve, and was it the right stakeholders to start the conversation? The exams, they've never made sense on a number of fronts. They still don't. And I think the challenge now is, what do we do moving forward? And then finally, what do we do with requalification, which is very, very soon. The new building code comes effective January, and we have no answer as to what's going to happen, and we can't afford to have this go sideways at the end of the day. That's 6 months from now. So if there's any intent for practitioners to requalify between now and January, it's going to be pretty hard to meet that goal. And then finally, again, and I think I've said this one a number of times, the impact on small business owners is really important through consultation. So when you're dealing with policy and you're the one in the room thinking out loud, and I do this when I do strategic sessions a lot, is, you're in the room on behalf of your profession, but you have to remember that your profession is made up a lot of different people. Some people work for corporations, some people are business owners with lots of employees, some have small employees. And a lot of times when we do consultations, it's the person in the room who's speaking on behalf of the profession. So it's important for the people that are participating in the consultations, but the government as well, to make sure that we have the right voices.